Some of the most recognizable war machines in the Star Wars universe were the massive walkers used by the Republic and the Empire. From the towering AT-AT to the more agile AT-ST, the many military walkers of Star Wars are all iconic. But why do they exist? Many people have argued that these walkers are less efficient than wheeled vehicles, repulsor lift craft, or even conventional battle tanks. Obviously, the reason there are walkers instead of conventional tanks in Star Wars is because walkers are pretty awesome, but is there an in-universe justification? Indeed, there is, and in this video, we're going to be explaining it.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
There were 4 primary varieties of tank in the Star Wars universe: wheeled tanks, track tanks, repulsor lift tanks, and walkers. Track tanks worked pretty much the same way as conventional tanks in the real world, and while they were rarer than other kinds of armored vehicles, they weren't unheard of. The Corporate Alliance NR-N99 Persuader-class droid tank is a good example of a tracked tank in Star Wars. Wheeled tanks were also self-explanatory, and they were also rather uncommon, with the notable exception of the Republic Juggernaut tank. Most tanks in the Star Wars universe were either repulsor lift based or walkers. Repulsor lift tanks used anti-gravity technology to hover up to a meter off the ground, while walkers, well, walked, using advanced gyroscopic balance systems to stay balanced. A lot of people would argue that, of these 4 kinds of tank, walkers would be the least effective. As the argument goes, walkers were slow, easy to trip up, difficult to maneuver, and easy to bring down with well-placed shots to the legs. Surely it would be better to have a hover tank or something with wheels or treads. Well, it's not quite that simple. First things first, a lot of those points are misconceptions. Walkers weren't slow by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, large walkers like the AT-TE and AT-AT were actually faster than repulsor lift tanks like the AAT or even most tanks in the real world. Those behemoths could reach speeds of up to 60 kilometers per hour, which is only just shy of the top speed of most real-world tanks. This misconception is due to scale. These large walkers look like they move slowly because they're absolutely massive. It's essentially like how passenger jets flying overhead look like they're moving slowly, when in reality this couldn't be further from the truth. That's just the larger walkers too. The AT-ST could top nearly 90 kilometers per hour, which is considerably faster than any real-world tank could manage in the best of conditions. Just as walkers weren't actually slow, they weren't easy to trip up or knock over either. Most walkers had onboard gyroscopic systems that kept them balanced, making even the top-heavy ones very difficult to knock over. Furthermore, tripping a walker was no simple task. It took an extraordinarily strong cable to be able to stop the legs of your average military walker. Your average rope wouldn't even slow one down. The walker's legs would just snap right through it, and the drivers probably wouldn't even notice your feeble attempt. Most of the time, walkers only tripped up on extremely unstable terrain. Exactly 1 walker in the 25,000-year history of the Star Wars universe was tripped up with a tow cable, and that was only thanks to the fancy flying of one of the galaxy's best pilots. Tripping walkers was not a viable strategy in 99% of cases. It's true that walkers could be disabled if you could take out their legs, but for most walkers this was easier said than done. The legs of most walkers were heavily armored and required plenty of firepower to actually damage. Remember, the legs on these things were designed to be able to carry a staggering amount of weight. They could take a laser cannon blast or 10. Furthermore, this weakness applies to other kinds of tanks as well. You could take out the wheels, treads, or repulsor lifts on a tank just as easily as you could take out the legs on a walker. Walkers could also be quite maneuverable, sometimes even more so than a treaded or wheeled tank. Just look at the AT-RT.
Did we get him? Should we run? It could be better if we just surrender now.
This is where we get to the primary advantage of walkers, the number one reason why the Republic and Empire preferred them to other kinds of tanks. Most walkers used by the Republic and the Empire were from the AT series, AT meaning all-terrain. Simply put, walkers could operate on terrain that other kinds of tanks would struggle with. Forests, icy wastelands, swamps, steep hills, and narrow urban environments can defeat wheeled or tracked tanks, but most walkers would be able to handle them just fine. The only terrain walkers couldn't really handle was unstable terrain, which was why repulsor lift tanks existed. Repulsor lift vehicles had their own shortcomings, however. Energy shields, ion storms, and EMPs could render them immobile, while walkers had no such weaknesses. A walker with a clever commander could pull all sorts of insane maneuvers. Some walkers, most notably the AT-TE, had magnetized feet, which allowed them to expand the definition of all-terrain in quite a few crazy ways. Walkers with magnetized feet could operate on warship hulls and asteroids. AT-TEs were also capable of scaling sheer cliffs. Many real-world tanks can't handle hills with a grade steeper than 45 degrees, never mind 90 degrees. Not every battlefield is an open plain. Sometimes, the Grand Army of the Republic and the Imperial Army had to fight in less than ideal climates, encountering all manner of obstacles on jungle worlds or mountainous wastelands. On planets like Felucia, where conventional tanks would have had to stop every 2 minutes to have an obstacle removed, the Republic's walkers could just step over whatever was in their way. Lighter walkers like the AT-RT or AT-ST could navigate through dense jungles and other maneuverability hindering environments without much trouble. Even the much larger walkers like the AT-AT had an easier time in forests than a conventional tank would. Now, walkers weren't perfect, and there were absolutely circumstances where wheeled, tracked, or repulsor lift tanks were better choices for Republic or Imperial ground forces. For those circumstances, the Republic and the Empire did have conventional tanks to field. Oftentimes, these tanks would be fielded alongside walkers, allowing the two types of tanks to complement each other. The Republic, for example, often deployed the HAV-W A6 Juggernauts or TX-130 fighter tanks alongside its walkers, filling in the blind spots of their armored units. It's important to consider one last reason why walkers were generally preferred over tanks by the Republic and the Empire: psychological warfare. Fear can be the most effective weapon on all the battlefield, and if they weren't on your side, walkers were absolutely terrifying. It's no coincidence that some of the earliest walkers, most notably the AT-TE, were designed to resemble massive predators. Many walkers were meant to instill a primal fear in enemy combatants, something that other kinds of tanks just couldn't pull off as well. There's something uniquely frightening about a massive armored behemoth lumbering toward you, crushing all in its path underfoot. Even for members of species that didn't have predators to fear back on their homeworlds, walkers could still generate a sense of being hunted. This was something the Empire capitalized on. The AT-AT, for example, was as much a symbol of terror as it was an armored troop transport. It adhered quite nicely to the Tarkin doctrine in that respect, specifically the following passage. The average citizen has no grasp of numbers nor a head for calculation. I maintain that the effectiveness of the Star Destroyer stems from not only its massive firepower, but from its size. When citizens look at a Star Destroyer and then compare it to the craft which might be mustered to attack it, they have a tendency to dismiss such a notion as suicidal rather than approach the problem tactically. The same was true for the AT-AT and other massive walkers. They were so massive, so heavily armored, and so powerful that they seemed invincible. It rarely mattered that they weren't. The very idea that they were unstoppable was often enough to win battles. This, for the record, is why the AT-AT was so tall. Its sheer height was meant to make enemy combatants feel insignificant and impotent in comparison to the massive war machines towering over them. It worked, too, and not just against enemy combatants. Some primitive locals on Dantooine, one of the worlds where the AT-AT was tested, were so terrified of the walkers that they actually started worshipping them, leaving out sacrifices for fear that the Metal Titans would return. Well, that's another Star Wars fandom myth that we've busted, but what do you think? Are there any particular walkers you'd like us to make videos about? Feel free to post your thoughts in the comment section below.